You assume that seeing reports what is already there. You think vision is neutral and safe. Yet a doubt appears. Does perception only receive, or does it also make? Ibn Arabi entered at this point. He explained that perception is never passive. It is an act within being, not a view from outside it. You realize that each judgment fixes a world, and, by fixing it, creates your participation in it. He taught that the real discloses itself through every act of awareness. The gaze is part of disclosure, not a step after it. If this is true, then each moment of seeing is already a moment of making. The question turns: when you look, who is doing the looking? And what is being brought into existence by that look? You want a framework. Ibn Arabi offered one: the unity of being. He explained that only the real truly is. Forms are modes of appearance. In this account, perception is not your private window. It is the real recognizing its possibilities through you. You notice the consequence. Every perception is relational, not isolated. He situated this within continuous creation renewal at each instant. The world is not a storehouse. It is an ongoing act. Your gaze participates in that act. If being alone is, and if perception is its movement through forms, can any seeing be neutral, or is neutrality just another form that the real assumes? You were trained to separate observer and observed. You stand here. The world stands there. Ibn Arabi challenged this habit. He explained that the split is conceptual, not ontological. What you call an object is a stabilized meaning within awareness. You notice how quickly interpretation arrives and then claims to be reality. He warned that this speed hides the creative power of attention. You do not merely receive. You confer. The more you insist on passivity, the more you ignore the act of conferral. You ask yourself, if interpretation arrives with perception, where does observation end and creation begin? Or did that line never exist? You wonder whose act this is. Ibn Arabi answered, all true seeing is the real seeing itself. He explained that awareness is not a possession, but a participation. The human gaze is a locus where the real recognizes its own faces. In this relation, seer and seeing do not form two independent substances. They are poles within one process. You test this idea. When you are deeply attentive, the sense of my seeing weakens, while clarity increases. He would say that this is the real's clarity shining through a clear locus. If the real is the original seer, what remains of the claim that perception belongs to an isolated self? You expect a technique. Ibn Arabi disappointed that expectation. He presented a discipline of non-separation rather than a ritual. He taught you to look without appropriation, no grasping, no defense, no self-assertion. In that looking, he said, perception ceases to be a personal project and becomes in alignment with disclosure. You try it. Suspend ownership and watch meanings arise without your demand to control them. He called this forbiddance, only because the ego treats the ownership as a threat. The method is to let the gaze be what it always was, an opening through which being recognizes itself. If ownership falls away, who is left to claim credit for understanding, and what becomes of the urge to dominate what is seen? You ask how this alignment works in the mind. Ibn Arabi explained that consciousness reflects forms without absorbing their limits. The reflection is precise, but the reflector remains free. When the reflector identifies with a form, distortion begins. When it remains open, disclosure remains clear. You notice that clarity increases when you do not rush to label. He emphasized that labeling is useful for action, yet dangerous for truth when it hardens into identity. The practice is to let concepts serve rather than rule. If reflection can be exact without bondage, can thought be used without turning into a barrier to the very reality it tries to know? You return to the I. You sense that ownership of perception builds the personal story. Ibn Arabi analyzed this directly. The ego claims authorship over awareness and then treats its claims as facts. He explained that the perceiver is a role within perception, not its source. Identity solidifies when attention keeps repeating its own narrative. You examine this repetition and find that it requires constant reinforcement. When reinforcement pauses, the role loosens. He advised letting attention rest in its source rather than its stories. If the perceiver is a role and not the root, what is lost by relaxing the role, and what becomes newly possible when it relaxes? You test the thesis in daily judgments. When you view someone as a problem, your actions confirm that framing. Ibn Arabi explained that perception carries performative force. He did not mean fantasy constructs facts. He meant that meaning guides relation, and relation shapes what becomes present for you. You realize that careful seeing is ethical seeing. To assume separation is to invite conflict. To recognize participation is to invite responsibility. He urged a gaze that honors the real in every face of experience. If perception is performative, isn't every moment an invitation to recalibrate meaning toward truth rather than habit? You ask what happens when participation is sustained. Ibn Arabi described unity of witnessing. The knower, the known, and knowing converge. He insisted this is not collapse into vagueness, but precision without division. Distinctions remain functional, yet their independence dissolves. You experience a shift. Instead of reaching out to grasp reality, you allow reality to define the terms of encounter. He would say that in this state, the real uses your locus without obstruction. The sense of inside and outside weakens. Decision becomes less about control and more about fidelity to what is true. If fidelity replaces control, what becomes of anxiety? And what guides action when fear no longer designs the map? You worry that non-separation could excuse anything. Ibn Arabi rejected that misunderstanding. He tied accurate vision to responsibility. Right seeing is right being. He explained that misperception fractures relation and produces harm. Clear seeing recognizes the real in each situation and responds with proportion and care. You notice that when ownership relaxes, reactivity declines and precision improves. Ethics then follows from ontology. Because being is one, relations deserve exactness. If the gaze can conceal or reveal the real, what standard should govern it? And how do you hold yourself accountable for the worlds your looking brings forth? You arrive at the practical synthesis. When you look without appropriation, meaning clarifies. When meaning clarifies, action becomes exact. Ibn Arabi explained that this is transformation from the root, not by forcing outcomes, but by purifying the act of seeing that precedes them. The world you meet is shaped by the quality of attention you bring. Attention aligned with the real recognizes possibilities that control cannot imagine. You realize that change begins at the level of perception and radiates into speech, choice, and structure. He called this a secret because it reverses the usual order, first seeing, then making. If seeing is already a kind of making, what becomes possible when the maker is the real and not the ego? You return to the opening question. Does perception only report, or does it also create? Ibn Arabi's answer is now clear. Perception participates in disclosure. The real sees through every locus. The world you meet is the meaning you agree to host. To practice his forbidden method is to withdraw ownership from awareness and let disclosure speak for itself. In that practice, the observer is relieved, the world is clarified, and action proceeds with proportion. The gaze transforms reality because it aligns with the source of reality. You end where you began, but with a different stance. Seeing is not a window, but a responsibility, and the most honest gaze